Yo, 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 boys and girls, bitches, hoes, men, women, children, whoever you are, everyone's welcome to it. Your boy Peter here, aka Peter Freakout 10, baby. Bringing you guys an episode of Video Game Time, where the good games are always reviewed. Alright, back again doing our video game review today. Alrighty. Now, today's episode was actually one that I was supposed to do for Screenfest, but some real-life stuff got in the way, which I don't want to talk about, but that's kind of one of the reasons this review's been delayed. But that all aside, today's episode, we're taking a look at a game that I think exposes how stupid some of these gaming magazines can be. Because this was a game that right when it came out, magazines like Game Informer and some gaming sites were quick to dismiss it as just a diet soda version of another survival horror game series that was at the top of the charts for many people. That being said, those that did play the game were quick to question if these magazines were being truthful and if these websites were telling the truth. Because when you play it, it's honestly its own beast. And it really is a game that deals with its horror in its own way from that particular series. And this situation is a prime example of just showing what people listening to these gaming publications are missing out on, and are listening to it to a point that they're not willing to judge a game, a movie, or a form of media for themselves, and they just dismiss things as a lesser game because a publication said so. Because those that did play the game will say the opposite. And what game is that, you may be asking? What game fell victim to the gaming publication's curse of making people see it through their eyes rather than judging it for themselves? Well, boys and girls, that game is none other than Silent Hill. But is it as good as its defenders have said? Well, better get yourself a lead pipe, a loaded gun, as well as a radio as we venture deep into the misty world of Silent Hill. Now, Silent Hill, this was a game made in the year 1999, and this was developed by a team called Team Silent, which this was their video game debut. And that was a development duo that started in the Konami Publishing Studios. And this was released as an exclusive for the PlayStation. Now, our journey starts in the year 1996, and the team had just been formed. Konami around this time wanted to explore the horror market and gave the creative director reins to Kichiro Toyama and his newly formed group to create a horror game. They were also using this as an opportunity to make a game that they thought would appeal to a US market. At first it was hard as they were unable to decide what type of horror game to make, and were taking so long to get an idea going. In fact, this process was taking so long that Konami almost considered canceling the project. It wasn't until they came to the conclusion of people finding the fear of the unknown terrifying and decided to build off of that with a little bit of psychological horror to the game. It was there Kichiro Toyama came up with the idea of a foggy world and an alternate world, which stemmed from a real-world situation or setting which would start in a Midwestern town, drawing influence from Jacob's Ladder, David Lynch movies, UFO theories, the occult, and the works of Stephen King, which helped him in getting into the horror aspect, as Kichiro really didn't know much about horror, especially since this was his first directing job, but researched what people found scary, and once that was going on, he began to feel a bit more comfortable. Around the same time as this was going on, Resident Evil 2 came out, and seeing it being more geared towards the action side of things rather than horror, they wanted to take things back to the horror roots instead of having a Hollywood action angle. They saw this as an advantage, and they thought this would make them stand out from the pack. Konami approved the idea, and they allowed the game to go into development. It was a rough start at this time, as they weren't given a huge budget to work with as opposed to other Japanese games that were awarded higher budgets. To bring Silent Hill to life, the team drew influence from central Pennsylvania and a bit of Chicago for the dock areas, with even some areas being from depictions of Midwestern towns in European and Russian culture, with some of the street names actually being named after famous science fiction and horror writers, and even had various horror references scattered about the game. Cough, cough, Silence of the Lambs. Where the fog and mist came into play, the team decided to use that to mask both to where the fog and mist came into play, the team decided to use those aspects to mask the PlayStation's limitations. But the other focus was really to bring the world to life in full polygons and a free-flowing camera that would change a lot to make the player feel unbalanced, which was not only a David Lynch reference, but also a nod to David Cronenberg. The most challenging aspect in making this game were the CGI cutscenes, which was work cut out for one person, Takayoshi Sato. He was originally working on correcting game's inconsistencies in the plot and working with the 3D modeling, but actually managed to talk his way to the higher-ups of Konami and show them a demo of what he had worked on, and they allowed him to design the characters and work on the cutscenes. Animating these cutscenes, though, was hard work, as he literally put himself through late hours of work to develop these scenes, and it was a tough job, as because there were some Caucasian characters in the game, he had no Caucasian people around the studio to reference. For the score, the team had someone else in mind to handle the score, but right in the middle of development, that person walked off the project. The team then became aware of Akira Yamaoka, who, when creating the game's music, relied heavily on the game's visuals instead of looking at the game's cutscenes, drawing influence from the score of Twin Peaks, and chose to work with a very industrial score to give the game a cold and rusty feel. In fact, when he presented the music for the first time, they mistook the music for a game bug. That wasn't until he elaborated on what he was trying to do. During the development, they showed the game off at E3 '98, where the cutscenes drew a round of applause from audience due to how impressive they looked. They began to show more of the game off, and the favorable relationship allowed them to explore more public relations on the project. Finally, after all was said and done, the game was released on February 23rd, 1999, and it sold really well for the company. It managed to sell over 1 million copies, which was, considering the small budget that the game had, a miracle that it even sold that much. And it actually managed to get into the 2 million sales category. So it was a hit for Team Silent, and after the release, it justified the team to move forward into a sequel. Despite this, though, the game started in the beginning to receive favorable reviews from critics. Critics praised the game for its audio, the use of the fog to mask the hardware limitations, which they felt added to the experience, the atmosphere, the game's music, and the story. While there were some comparisons between it and the 2 Resident Evil games released up to that point, with some even kind of hinting at that it was a diet soda Resident Evil. While some, including myself, argued against that, pushing the point forward that Silent Hill handled the horror in its own way. However, criticism was leveled at the game's voice acting, despite not being as bad as Resident Evil, and the game's controls. Despite this, the game quickly became a hit for the company and garnered a huge fan base, with some even preferring it to Resident Evil. Now, this whole situation with people disliking the game is why I don't listen to publications, magazines, and I instead decide to judge things on my own. I say this a lot too. I point out where people stand with their thoughts on a particular form of media to kind of show where I place myself in terms of an opinion and build up to my final thoughts. And up to the point that I started this game, I didn't have as much experience with the survival horror genre despite starting the first Resident Evil, but I didn't finish it up to that point. That's changed right now. I beat the Jill portion. I'm working on beating the Chris portion so I can get a review going so I can start Resident Evil 2, especially in prep for Code Veronica. But upon reading this after it's showing at E3, I was really interested in giving it a play. However, at the time I wanted to play it, the prices for it were insane. I have no idea why a complete version costs a lot on eBay. Hey, when the price it has there could feed my family for a week. It's ridiculous. especially with the state the world is in now. So I had to turn to gaming's current friend right now, emulation, which I mentioned in the first part of my Let's Play of this, was because a user on here I like named Gara of the Rage, who encourages a lot of people to use emulation, so I figured I'd do it. Another friend of mine I talked to on chat rooms, which at the beginning I wouldn't have done, especially with how careful I am with my PC and what I install, because I worry about viruses. With that said, though, turning to patches recently for games I want to play like Thief the Dark Project or Shadow Man kind of gave me the push I needed to really try emulation on top of wanting to play it badly. So I set up DuckStation, waited till late to play it. And I gotta ask, why the fuck do I hear so many people comparing this to Resident Evil? And the comparisons that I hear just baffle me, because when you really look at the games, they're not even in the same ballpark. Oh, the menu looks the same. It has the same accessibility options, or controls the game. So what? You can apply that to any game out there, and you could look at that. The accessibility options mirror another game taking influence from another. At the top of my head, like Turok 2, you could say, took a lot from GoldenEye. Doesn't mean it's a ripoff. It just has influences there. Take it from it. Like, there's more. There's quests to do. It's not just go through the area and shoot them. Doesn't make it a ripoff. Here it applies the same. Just because it has those same things doesn't make it a Resident Evil ripoff. It's what you take what Resident Evil did so well with and apply your own spin on it. And it does it here. And it worked. Hell yes, it worked. I love this game. And I could totally see where the love for this game comes from. And the fan base that it has garnered. And even though I'm almost done with Resident Evil, the first one, and I haven't played the second one, in all honesty, judging this to the first Resident Evil, I have to give the edge to this game a bit more. Because Resident Evil, when you really get down to it, is aliens with zombies. Which is great because there's some fun to that concept and it works very well. That being said, Silent Hill is a completely different beast. It's about building atmosphere and exploring the fear of the unknown. It all comes together to create an experience that I feel stands out from Resident Evil and does it really well. But I'll explain why later. But basically, the plot of the game is basically you play as Harry Mason, who we learn that he and his wife found a baby abandoned on the road, and they decide to care for it as their own and name it Cheryl. One night, while Harry is driving with Cheryl, they get into a car crash, and Harry shakes himself awake from the wreckage and finds not only his car is destroyed, but Cheryl is missing. And they are in this town called Silent Hill, where this woman named Dahlia Gillespie, who has started this cult, has basically taken over the town, and the few normal ones that are there live in fear of her. And there's these monstrous beings that patrol the area day and night, some of which pertain to some of the normal folks' turmoil and flaws. And there he meets a few people, including a cop named Sybil, and he decides that he's gonna step into the world of Silent Hill and figure out how his daughter pertains to Dahlia's plans, all the while dealing with moments where he finds himself going into a daze and finding himself in this hellish version of Silent Hill, complete with rust chains and dirt, which gives insight into the turmoil to the hell that the characters find themselves in. Will Harry be able to save his daughter and figure out Dahlia's evil plans? Or will he forever be stuck in this hell that he will never be able to escape from? I really don't get why people are so quick to say Silent Hill sucks because it's a Resident Evil clone or they feel it's inferior. Like I said, I don't get why the menu, accessibility options, and how you change weapons are really the one area that people pick on to say it sucks because it looks like the Resident Evil menu. I think that's really unfair to really say the game sucks because of that. Because As I said, in my mind, there are a lot of games that draw influence from other games, but I really feel it's how those elements are implemented in the game and whether they do enough to make them stand on their own is what should matter to some of these people. And I feel this is why I don't listen to the reviewers. I mean, I love looking at magazines, I love looking at the sites, and I'm glad IGN gave this a positive review, so they're not the problem. But when you have people like Game Informer, who awarded the game a 7.25, saying they did a good job ripping off Resident Evil, that stuff shouldn't be taken as proof till people have played the game, because those that have played it think differently, including myself. Because what makes Silent Hill so intriguing for me is the story. I like the idea of a guy finding himself in a town looking for his daughter, and at moments finding himself in this hellish reality of that town, serving as a metaphor for somebody walking through someone else's hell and turmoil. And from there on, you go down the rabbit hole and figuring out why it is the way it is. The story makes no attempt to spoon feed what exactly is going on to the player, but instead relies on the player to figure things out themselves and pushes the player to really examine the environment and figuring out what exactly is going on. And I like that because the game really encourages you not to rush through the game to the ending, because if you do, you're going to be really confused. And so don't play this game like it's Metal Gear Solid or even Resident Evil. This is a game that you really have to take slowly in understanding the story. And I like that because while the game is slow, the team at Team Silent really know how to develop the game's world and really present it in a way that's both scary and at times weirdly poetic in some areas. Especially when it comes to certain aspects of the story involving the town and how the music is used to present a chilling and creepy image, but also makes it rather beautiful, which I think is a testament to the talents of the Japanese culture that they have over at Team Silent and how they present the horror genre, which is very evident in video games, especially in fact, I think more so in this one than it is in Resident Evil. I like how it presents the characters that you meet in the game and the state that they're in and how uncomfortable they are around you or just how you are uncomfortable with them. You really feel like you're looking at their problems on full display. Like you have this guy named Kaufman who may have hints that he's involved in terrible stuff and he may have a drug addiction. There's another named Lisa who you could tell had some very bad stuff happen to her at the hospital. She's also on drugs and she appears twitchy. And it's all really creepy because you never know if these people are being truthful or if this is the reality that you know Silent Hill for. The game relies on you to figure it out while also holding on to the fear of the unknown. And I think they get creative with the world of Silent Hill, with random moments of Harry going into a trance in this sort of alternate reality of Silent Hill. And you wonder if that is how it actually looks or the one you're currently in is how it looks. And it allows for some really creepy moments, so like the school in the bathroom. You find this one monster wrapped in razor wire like it's this cocoon. So there's some grisly images in the story, and that's just the appetizer. If you guys want the main course, you gotta play the whole game. I don't want to spoil anything because there's some scenes in the game that are really surprising. Now, with that said, one aspect of the story that I do feel could be improved is definitely in the main character of Harry Mason. Not that I find him to be a bad character, he's just really bland. There's not as much character development put towards him as I think there could have been, and all you get is that he's just an everyman looking for his daughter. It really doesn't seem like there's an arc with him or he's learning anything. There's tiny hints of backstory that you do get, but none of it comes around back to him at the end. And it doesn't really tie into anything going on in the story. So I really feel his character development could have been so much better. And if anything, the world around him has more character than he does. I don't know if they did this purposefully to really make you feel like Harry Mason, so your reaction to stuff is how you're feeling, but it just really would have been better had they given him some character. Besides that, though, I think the story was great and definitely showcases Team Silent's talents in the story department. Now, on a technical side, this game shows what Team Silent is capable of. And despite Capcom doing a fantastic job with both of the Resident Evil games, for what I've seen of 2, but in terms of graphics, I think this game is leaps and bounds more impressive on a technical side than any of those games. If you want to compare this to Resident Evil in this area, Silent Hill looks much better than the first Resident Evil, and it's on par with the second one. They went for a fully rendered environment as opposed to the still frame environment that I'm not putting down, that looks good for what they could do in the first Resident Evil. But I think with where they took the story, it allowed them to get creative in the graphics department. Because both in the graphics department are amazing. And honestly, some of the best on the PlayStation next to Soul Reaver. For the real Silent Hill, each area carries a huge amount of detail to really push home the fact that there was once a sense of life to this world that is no more, from the dilapidated stores to the houses that look as though people left in a hurry, to the blood smeared on the wall in certain areas, or monsters coming about and patrolling the areas. And you basically now see what the area is. This is really where the game pushes forward the horror of the unknown, as you are asking yourself many questions as you go through this area, like what's going on, and what happened, what could have done this. And the areas are designed in such a manner where you see what was inflicted upon some of these people. And the life that is there are these patrolling monsters looking to kill people with no explanation as to who they are. And just little things like the lighting effects on your flashlight look great. It's not the most realistic looking lighting effects. Hell, I'll even say Shadow Man's look a bit better. But for what it is, I thought they did really good. Speaking of little details, I also like as you get deeper into the game and you have a map, you'll see areas that you come to where there's a dead end, and on the map they'll appear marked off, or there's certain markings for particular areas that you'll circle and they'll be like, go here, find this. That really adds to the immersion of being lost in this town. And of course, I know people are waiting for me to touch upon this, the fog, which I thought was an ingenious idea, and I know a lot of people agree. I love it for the fact that the game not only uses it to hide the limitations of the console's hardware, but also being used as a way to create fear in the player, as you never know what's in front of you or around the corner. And the fog obscures what's in front of you, creating more fear for the player and keeping them on their toes, especially with the use of the radio, as you'll never know when or where they'll attack. But that's just the real world Silent Hill. At certain points, the game will transition into the other world, which is a stark contrast to the real Silent Hill world. Everything is rusted, run down, doors that you couldn't enter before can't be entered, while the doors that you could enter in the real world can't be entered now. At times, the sidewalks are replaced with these cage-like things that you walk on. And there's a lot more gritty imagery on display. It's a bit more raw than the one in the real world, and you never guess what's the right reality, whether it's the real world's reality or that this is the true reality that you are currently in. Kind of where you see, while the game holds on to the fear of the unknown, it's really a bit more in your face with the gritty nature of the world, and I think that will appeal to people who play this that aren't into slow burn horror and are waiting for an area where the game becomes a bit grittier or is more in your face with the more bloody side of the game. There are some bloody moments. It's not incredibly gory like, say, Resident Evil or even Shadow Man, but there are some moments of good blood in there. It's just not as excessive as some may think. But for me, they get the job done and really use the environment greatly in both areas to get under your skin in particular ways. On top of that, it may be because I was running this on an emulator, but the game runs really well. The frame rate remains consistent in both combat and not in combat, so you'll feel really satisfied in both areas. Character models also look really good. It does look like they were designed in the way Metal Gear Solid did it with its character model, as there isn't as much expression on them, and they're definitely not in the vein of, say, Soul Reaver or even Shadow Man's, I'll say, look a bit better, but they look fine. The creature designing on their models is one of the highlights of the game. There's a great amount of variety to the creatures you come across and are designed in a way that will keep you awake at night. Like there's the air screamer, which is similar to a pterodactyl and it will fly down and attack you. There's these weird kid creatures that will run up and start biting you. Each area has its own monster that serves as a manifestation of the people suffering in Silent Hill. And I like how they're designed in a way that reflects about particular characters. It really makes the monsters stand out and have some connection to the characters in a way that I feel gives the enemies a form of character as opposed to Resident Evil, which are just nameless zombies. The cutscenes are also animated greatly, despite most of the game being told through in-engine cutscenes, with small portions having their own animated cutscenes that do have some creepy imagery. In particular, the moment when you see Cheryl getting into Silent Hill and she's just standing there and like the white ash or snow coming down, that is a really creepy image that is still embedded into my head after I've beaten the game. Especially the fact that this game doesn't rely on a huge orchestral score to tell you, this game is scary, be scared. Which all you could thank Akira Yamaoka for, who did a wonderful job with the game's sound, with the voice acting being fine. I'll say that. The one thing I will say, speaking of the sound, before I go any further, the voice acting's fine. It's definitely better than Resident Evil's voice acting. But it's other areas of the game's sound that really succeeds. I love the industrial-like feel he went for, in particular, going back to when you first see Cheryl, and the score really gives the game this sense of coldness and wetness that really runs up your body the minute that cutscene starts, and it's all boop, boop, boop. I thought it really vibed with the game's tone. So I really appreciate Akira for stepping out of the box and creating a score that I think really complements the game's tone. So yeah, the technical side, I think this game is leaps and bounds above what Capcom accomplished with Resident Evil. And the people saying that it just copied the look of Resident Evil need to take another look. But of course, no review can be complete without talking about the gameplay. Now, with the comparisons to Resident Evil that pointed out, this game basically is nothing like Resident Evil. This game takes the foundation set by Resident Evil and molds it into its own thing. But the quick rundown for how they play is basically Silent Hill's played from a third-person perspective with a fixed camera, where you basically work your way through the world of Silent Hill to figure out what's going on and figure out the mystery. It's not meant to be played linear. Instead, the game encourages you to completely explore each area of Silent Hill before advancing. With that, though, the game, much like Resident Evil, doesn't hold your hand. So you really have to focus on making sure you have each and every area explored before advancing. The only thing helping you is a map. In each area you go to, the map changes for each area. You have to find a map, too, so it's not like the whole map is there for you from the start. And when you find a clue, Harry will mark the map for a particular location that you'll go to advance the game. And depending on what you have observed, it'll unlock a particular portion of the game that will determine an ending, along with your actions in those areas that you unlock. There's 5 endings, so there's definitely some replay value as you go through the game to get those endings. Now, going through those areas, it all comes down to controls. And despite some people saying that Harry controls very similar to the Resident Evil characters, and while yes, that is true, I think Harry controls a lot better. I feel the movement on him doesn't feel as floaty as the characters of Resident Evil 1. The turning feels a lot quicker, because one of the problems that I have with Resident Evil, and I'll touch upon this in the review, the turning when you're shooting and the aiming feels very slow. And there's some points when the characters in RE1 will target something that is very far away as opposed to the thing that is close to you. So that was very annoying. And it made it feel very annoying. And the reaction to meleeing someone on the ground in this game is a lot better, as it feels a lot quicker than RE1, as I feel with RE1 it was very slow to melee. Here it's a lot quicker. So despite them having similar setups, the control schemes, I do feel this one molds what didn't work in RE1 and improves upon it in this game. And when it comes to combat, this is not meant to be a combat-heavy game in the vein of Resident Evil, because the game encourages you to run away, because standing there shooting at an enemy, you'll end up wasting your ammo when you could be using it for something you need most. Especially since you're not playing as an agent, a cop, or a soldier like Resident Evil 1, 2, or 3. You're playing as a normal, everyday guy with no experience in the combat field, so obviously you're not going to take down an enemy easily. And if you play the game like Resident Evil, you're going to hate the game. With that said, when there is combat, mechanically, I think it's a lot better than the first Resident Evil as well, as you're allowed to work with more melee weapons, and it actually feels like when you work with melee weapons, you're doing actual damage to an enemy and taking him down, as opposed to Resident Evil, as I hated using the knife, and it just felt like he was swinging at air when he used it, as opposed to here, which actually feels like you're doing damage. And you don't even have to get so close like you had to in Resident Evil. And especially since in this game, when the enemies do get close and you're hitting them with the pipe, it feels like you're doing damage. And much like Tomb Raider, the enemies have their own weapons that affect them. Like, say the shotgun may work on one enemy, but it may not work on another, as opposed to the lead pipe or the pistol. So you really have to decide which weapons will work best. And it's got a pretty cool arsenal of weapons in this game. You start the game with a pipe that you can beat people with. There's a pistol, there's a shotgun, there's a rifle. And once you beat the game, you'll get a katana, a chainsaw, a hyper blaster, depending on if you get the best ending. So if you're looking forward to looking at those weapons, you want to get the best ending, which will come in handy, especially when you come across a boss, which are sporadic, and they mostly consist of you either shooting away at them, or similar to Soul Reaver, waiting for a weak point to open up so you can blast away at them. So while not taking much thought, I still think the bosses themselves are cool, and definitely add some different enemy types to the game, like the huge-ass moth, or the weird lizard that'll crawl at you, similar to one of the bosses in Soul Reaver. But the last aspect of the game that we need to touch upon are the puzzles, and I like them. Playing devil's advocate this one time, I guess you could say they are kind of the same thing as Resident Evil, as some of them involve you going and fetching a particular thing, inserting it into a hole, which is definitely not the image I was trying to use, so don't try and do that, guys. Please don't do that. But there's some other stuff too, like a piano you have to figure out to basically will open something up and get you a key. There's one point, there are some fetch quests too, like there's this one part where you have to basically go to this door that leads to the backyard that you have to exit, but it's locked and you don't know where the keys are, and the only way to recognize is where the keys are is to find this map in the house, and it'll tell you to go there to find the keys. And the keys themselves are a nod to the Wizard of Oz, and each are named after the characters in that movie, which I admit is a nice little nod. And with those areas, like you had one area where you have color objects on a door, and you basically have to insert them into a particular pattern. The game doesn't tell you the pattern, so you're left trying to figure it out yourself. Despite that, I appreciate this, though. I appreciate the creativity of the puzzles and them not being so damned down to a point where they tell you everything. And much like Soul Reaver, these puzzles really test your knowledge in examining the environment. And all this combined to create a playtime that is long, of 14 and a half hours. So it is a pretty lengthy game if you're going to do everything. So yeah, this is a really solid horror game that I feel deserves to be looked beyond the similarities to Resident Evil. Because really for me, it's just as good of a game as the first Resident Evil, and on par with 2 in some areas. Now, when it comes to cons, I have touched upon one already, in particular the main character of Harry Mason, not feeling like he has much of an arc on him, and I really wish they explored him a bit more, especially with his story. But another I have is, with the bosses, I do wish that there was some a bit more some build up to them. Not in that it's a bad boss and they're not fun to do. It's just from a story side, I wish that they had a bit more build up to kind of get you on your toes a bit, and their final reveal being like, oh my god, like have some moments where they're just lurking in the shadows, so it would make the reveal a bit more, oh my god, and getting that shock of seeing them. And like in particular, like with the book that Harry read, with the whole thing being like a metaphor for one of the bosses later, it would make you think back to the book later and having the reveal of it and having the build up to it, like what is that? And then when it finally comes out, you're like, oh my god, that's part of the book. You don't get that with the game. And seeing it in the cuts and seeing it finally in a cutscene would have made more sense. Because how they're shown, there is no sense of impact to the sight of them. And I hope they fix that with the second one. But that's really my only two problems with the game, because bottom line, Silent Hill is one of, if not the best survival horror games on the PlayStation. All of which is being said from someone and is coming from someone who likes Resident Evil and looks like he'll prefer Resident Evil 2 a bit more. But that being said, this game doesn't deserve to be called a ripoff of Resident Evil. This game does enough to differentiate itself from Resident Evil, and at times outdoes the original, and like I said, falls in line with Resident Evil 2. So if you beat Resident Evil 1 and 2 and still haven't gotten to 3 yet, I highly recommend you check out Silent Hill. Don't listen to the reviews. Give this game a pickup. It is probably one of the best games of 1999. So, when it comes down to the final rating, I give Silent Hill a 9.6 out of 10, baby. And it deserves it. Therefore, gets the Alexandra seal of approval. Definitely one to check out if you like Resident Evil and are looking for something a bit similar while waiting to check out Resident Evil 3. Or if you've beaten Resident Evil 3, here's a good substitute before the next one. But yeah, definitely check it out. But that's my review for Resident Evil. Next time I am going to do a review of The Bone Collector, so be on the lookout for that. I was just writing it up Gonna be writing it up soon. Just want to get this done with. I'm also gonna do a review of Shadow Man, so be on the lookout for that. I just want to get the rest of the parts up so I could use it for the video. So that's what's coming next. Also, totally gonna do a review of Sleepy Hollow. I just gotta read up on the Fangoria of it, so that'll be coming soon. That's what's to come this month. I'm also planning on doing a Kevin Smith marathon in prep for Dogma, like triple feature. This one I picked up on DVD, Mallrats. So that'll be coming soon. Got a lot planned for this month, so be on the lookout for those. With that said, I will see you guys later. Let me know in the comments below what you guys think of Silent Hill. Are you guys a fan of this game? Do you like Resident Evil more? Which do you prefer? Let me know down below in the comments. Be sure to rate, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.